I'm co-founder of the Together Association. And we're really excited because today we're in conversation with someone who's a very well-known farmer in his own fraternity, but up until recently may well have considered that was the thing he was doing, being very good at his profession and respected by many. But in light of what's happened recently with Rachel Reeves and the budget and the announcements after having been told that farmers would not be actually experiencing any new taxes, we've seen many things happening in positions on them. And so Clive Bailye has come to prominence in the public sphere as well. And we're very pleased to be talking with you today, Clive. Welcome.
No, thanks, Alan. Thanks for inviting me. Thank you.
So just what would be good is just to get a little bit of a background on you, Clive, and to find out kind of how you got into farming, how long you've been doing it, what kind of farming you do, just so we kind of set the overview a bit, if you would.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm a bit of a reluctant farmer, to be honest. I don't, unlike a lot of farmers' sons, I actually didn't grow up, wanting necessarily to farm. So the farm that I grew up on was a dairy farm. So, all livestock. It started by my grandfather. So I'm third generation. My grandfather kind of started it just just after the end of Second World War, actually. Which there's some relevance when you think about when he started. He was a tenant, so he rented 8 acres from a local landlord. Married a girl in the village. They started a little dairy herd on his 8 acres, like just a couple of cows, built that up over the years. And of course, he farmed for a period where what he was producing was very much in demand, and he wasn't competing with, kind of cheap imports to lower standards. He was a lot less affected by legislation. In fact, everything through his entire farming career was encouraging him to produce more, to feed a nation that had just come out of a world war where they were still under rationing. So people really understood the importance of kind of food security and making sure that a country could feed itself, something that I think we've lost as food's become, it's just there on supermarket shelves and whatever. So he really had the best run, to be honest. He farmed for a period where he was able over time to buy his own little farm from his landlord, and then bit by bit reinvest, borrow some money along the way to kind of expand his acreage and expand his dairy herd, build that up, through to kind of like the kind of 60s, mid 60s, which my father would have then kind of taken over, started to get involved in the family business and take over. My father did very much the same thing, continued to kind of build the business and borrowed money to kind of expand it, reinvested. Not even my grandfather, my father, none of them lived like, kind of excessive wealthy kind of lifestyles. I think there's so many preconceptions that annoy me terribly about farmers that, they all just spend their lifetimes, skiing, shooting, driving around in Range Rovers. It's just, that is there because, but for some, but it's not the norm. That's not how most, kind of are. Most farmers are very much, they work long hours, hard to kind of build a business, invest, often for that next generation. So I say, although my grandfather died late 80s when I was kind of, quite young child then really, but I knew him before he died. And I think that's the thing. That's why what we're probably going to talk about more, that this inheritance tax thing is an issue, because most of his life's work had been about building something for future generations.
Yeah.
And that's the importance, and that's the bit that I think, the budget took away from so many family farms and that generation now that are in this desperate situation. So me personally, I grew up on this dairy farm that by this point was kind of like a fairly regular family business, not big, not a huge farm, but equally not a small farm. I didn't really share my father and grandfather's love for livestock. I've got more of a mechanical mind, I think. The tractors appeal to me more. And I think that's probably, God, maybe I'm a bit lazy. I don't know, because you grow up on a dairy farm, you watch your parents working really hard. It's really long hours. Christmas Day was always interrupted by, it didn't start till my dad had gone out and milked the cows and fed all their livestock in the morning. I'd go and help him as a kid. Then we do Christmas Day, but at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, with a big belly full of turkey, you had to go out and do it all again, kind of thing. Family holidays are few and far between and I think, to be honest, that's for me, I think, why I was more interested in the kind of farming I've gone down the route of, which is growing crops. So today we grow cereals, so wheat, barley, beans, that kind of thing. Also all combinable crops, no livestock. The livestock left it kind of, the timing kind of worked, I suppose. It was around that time we'd had the foot and mouth crisis, which kind of did for a lot of the dairy herds in our area. Pressure from kind of imports and milk boards changing, the politics changing around farming was making it harder and harder. And that was at a time when I went off to I went to agriculture university, did a degree in agriculture. Again, still at that time, not really knowing what I wanted to do for a living. If I'm honest, I was being a bit, well, it felt like it'd be an easy degree because I'd grown up on a farm. I'd probably know how to do it. But yeah, kind of reluctantly kind of came home to it and then kind of fell in love with it, actually. I went and worked away, worked in other things in the city, but actually I think learned from that I was a farmer after all. And I built it. I built the arable business up, the combined crop business up to what it is today. We farm our own land. I've managed to add some more land. But we predominantly, like a lot of farmers, we farm a lot of tenanted land as well. And also we farm for other farmers that have retired but still want to retain their farm, still live in the farmhouse. So call it contract farming, where effectively we're a contractor to other farmers as well. So yeah, that's how I've got it.
That's a brilliant overview. Thank you. And I mean, some people watching this might have been on Worthy Farm at Glastonbury, but they're like, I don't want to like stereotype people, because I think that's what this government has done, and they've made a big mistake thinking, it's just like you say, a few wealthy aristocrat type people, or everyone in the city is not going to like farmers. They've made a big miscalculation. But the picture you've painted just within your own family really speaks to the backdrop of the spine, the backbone of Britain, people that are working the land, that are investing in the future, providing us with food, being kind of fiscally responsible, really tough times. And it's partly about our culture and who we are. There's obviously the economics of it. And I think that's so essential. It seems to me it's one of the reasons that, as you guys have started being vocal about it, it's resonated a lot with many in the British public. I mean, there's that bit as well, isn't it? It's obviously a lot of you are faced with an existential question, so we should talk about that, right? What's it going to mean? And you should try to explain it, because some people are just saying, oh, they should just, like everyone else, pay their inheritance tax. You've got a house, it's worth $1.2 million. You should pay it on the 200,000. So we should talk about how that's different. But it's our culture, it's our history, isn't it? It's really the tapestry of who we are, farmers in Britain.
Yeah, look, and I think it's important as well. And I've always hated this image farmers have of moaning. Let's face it, we have a bit of reputation. If it's raining, we're moaning it's raining. If it's too dry, we're famous for moaning about stuff, I guess. And it's fair enough, probably justified when it comes to the weather. But hey, this is the UK, and the weather never does what we want it to. And actually, if you understood just how much the wrong weather can affect whether you're going to make or lose money this year, I think most people in that position would kind of stress about it a little bit. But it's not all bad. So that's the first point I want to make, it actually. And this is why most farmers farm. They're not doing it for the money. The return on that capital, that huge amount of capital that you need these days to run like a viable farm that even produces its owners with the equivalent of, say, the minimum wage. And that's the truth of it, really, where it's at these days. If you put that same capital in just about anything else, if you just stuck it in a building society account, dead safe kind of thing, high, decent interest account, you'd have 10 times the return on investment. So no farmers farming for the money now. So there must be something good about it, right? Or why would we do it? And that's the thing. It is a vocational occupation, multi-generational vocational occupation. We get to work in this wonderful environment. We're close to nature all the time. Our commute is, you walk out the door and you're at work. You can, although the hours are long, you can kind of, to some extent, choose them. If you want to, kind of have your lunch hour here, then or while you're out working in a field, or there's a lot of really good stuff about it. And it's interesting. Every day is different. We get to, if you love animals, you work with animals. So you're doing something you love. If you love, kind of like your tractors and machinery, you get to work some really interesting, exciting technology and machinery. So that's why people do it, along with this idea of building something. It's a really tangible thing. When you're working land or breeding animals and you're seeing an improvement every year, farmers, you finish harvest and it's like every year next year's going to be better. Next year, no matter how bad a harvest you've had or whatever disaster you've had to your livestock, we're the eternal optimists in that it's like, well, but next year it'll be better. Next year I'll get that record yield, or or the next generation of this livestock will be bred even better than the one before, or whatever. So it gets under your skin like that, in a way that puts the financial stuff to one side. But equally, we're running businesses. It would be a blooming expensive hobby. It's getting that way for some already. It has been over the years, and there's a variety of reasons. We can go into the reasons why it's become like it is and what needs to change. But that's what makes it all worthwhile. This eternal optimism and love for the job, the vocational nature of it.
So that's fantastic. If you're a cynic, or some people might say, well, that's great, you crack on, but that doesn't explain why I want to get in my supermarket or even at a farmer's market. Why can't I get something from, if you have economies of scale, you have these big entities, maybe they can get them to us cheaper. Maybe it's just like the old artisans in Britain that used to, maybe the time has come. That might be an argument that some people make. And I'd like you to address that, right? But firstly, can you just talk us through, because there's a lot of confusion. The inheritance tax, the BPR, which we're also saying a lot of our small and medium-sized businesses, it's impacting them, and the question of starting a business up, and APR, without getting too technical, what's just been done by the Chancellor? What does this mean? And talk a bit about, you've got tractors, I guess you might have a combine harvester, they all cost money. Tell us a bit how it all works, if you would.
Okay, I try not to sound like an accountant now. I've spent enough time talking to them the last few weeks, and they're really quite boring people. So I try not to do that. So first of all, get past the jargon first. APR, agricultural property relief. BPR, business property relief. Now, when a farm, and as you just said there, Alan, totally right. BPR, not unique or special to farmers at all. That's the same for every single, apart from the big corporates, every single family, small, medium-sized business would have used BPR to pass to the next generation. So farmers aren't special or different in that point of view. But what we also had was something called APR, agricultural property relief. And that allowed in succession some of the assets that you would say, so business property relief, that's where your tractors, your livestock, your combine harvester, your crops in store, your grain storage buildings, your milking parlour, your livestock buildings, all that kind of thing, that's part of your business. So that BPR, business property relief, meant that when that passed to the next generation, there was no inheritance tax on that. So then the business could continue, without that burden hanging over it, just like everybody else. We also had farmers had also agricultural property relief. Now, genuinely farming businesses weren't actually that reliant on APR, because as I just explained, as a business property relief meant they didn't have any inheritance tax on the majority of those assets. But there were parts of their business where they used it. For instance, the farmhouse, which often is, again, there's this preconception of these farmers, they live in these big houses that worth, £1 million or more. But it's almost like they're out of proportion to their income. If they were trying to buy that house today out of their minimum wage style return on investment from their capital, there's no way they'd be living in those houses. But it just so happened that house is part of the farm. You can't go, well, I'm going to let someone else live in my farmhouse and I'll go and buy a terraced house in the local town. If you're a farmer, particularly livestock, you kind of need to live on your farm. I think most people would understand and appreciate that. And those houses have become, because they're in the countryside, in nice places, their values have been driven up by people who have done well in other industries and businesses. They want to move out of the cities, buy a nice place in the countryside. So that's pushed the prices of these rural properties up. So the farmer now finds himself living in a house that's way more valuable than he would be, buying and paying a mortgage on himself now. Now, agricultural property relief kind of respected that and kind of said, well, actually, look, your house as a farmer is part of your business, really. The farmhouse and the farmhouse kitchen table for a lot of people is their office. They don't go to a separate office or a porter cabin in the yard or whatever. Mostly the farmhouse kitchen table becomes like where they do fill in their paperwork and do all that kind of stuff. So that the farmhouse was covered by agricultural property relief, meaning again, that became inheritance tax exempt. So those two things, the way when a farm passed, it used a combination of APR and BPR to do that in a way that was, kind of didn't create a problem for the next generation. But, you can say, okay, well, where's the difference here? You know, if businesses have got to pay, everyone's got to pay their taxes. We all want better services. We all want a better NHS. We want our potholes filling. We want better rural policing. All these problems, farmers want them the same as everybody else. We're not special. We're not actually different to anybody else. We're regular citizens like everybody else that want these things. So what's wrong? Yeah, we've all got to contribute. We've all got to pay our taxes, right? That's fine until you understand what's different about farming. And we'll get to the reasons why this has occurred, I'm sure. But the difference with farming is the huge amount of capital involved. Land has become really expensive, 10, 15, 20, even £30,000 an acre in some areas like the Cotswolds, where lots of your investment people come in and start buying it. So land's become really expensive. Tractors, £250,000, combines, £500,000 plus. The capital involved in being a farmer is multi-millions. You're not really, there will be exceptions. So I don't want to insult some people who are really efficient with nice little niches and organic farms or whatever, that have kind of found a really nice little niche. But everyone can't do that. A niche isn't a niche if everyone starts doing it, right? So, but generally speaking, if you're less than 3 million quid's worth of assets, you're probably not a viable farming business anymore. You really would. If you take that 0.5% return on investment and take which is an industry kind of, realistic average, that means a £10 million invested farm is only making 50,000 a year before tax. So pay your tax on that. That's what, 35, something like that. And that will often be being shared between more than one generation. So you really are, the amount invested huge. Now, that means there's just not the return to be able to pay that tax bill as well out of profits. So a more normal figure, I believe I read something the other day that in wider business, 9%, 9 to 10% is a more realistic return on capital invested. So that's hugely more than that 0.5%. So it means that farmer inheriting, from that next generation, the only way they can pay that tax bill is to sell some of the farm. If you start selling some of the farm, you become even less able to be viable. As you shrink the business, you lose any economies of scale that you had, and it becomes unviable. And if you do this over enough generations, well, there's no farm left. Or you start to reach a logical conclusion, well, at these returns, I might as well just sell up anyway. Then who buys it? Because if farming's uninvestable, who then buys that land? Yeah, it becomes only really investable by people who can think really long term. So the big corporate institutional investors, the BlackRocks and other such type companies that have been talked about, they will buy with a 100-year view, because they will see that, well, actually, as population increases, land becomes scarcer with, desertification in some areas, or wars, or the global geopolitical kind of pressures. They will see that, at some point in the future, actually, food's going to get the supply and demand curve starts to cross over. And if we have some kind of almost monopoly or semi-monopoly, not monopolistic kind of situation or cartel situation with other large corporate landowners, suddenly food can become like the next oil, where, it's not 0.5% return on investment anymore. It could suddenly become really, the most important commodity in the world, which it always has been when you think about it. One thing none of us can do without is food. So it's quite a dangerous situation. And that's the longer term view. The shorter term view from those kind of corporates is there's a lot of other uses for land, particularly in the UK. The development potential for housing. If land around me suddenly gets permission for development for housing, it's worth millions of pounds an acre. So it's a bit like buying lottery tickets. If you can own enough acres of land, some of them will come up for development at some point and you'll see a big return there. Equally, alternative energy like solar, wind turbines, and even more the kind of this whole carbon offset thing, which is just a bizarre kind of whole concept, really, where if you plant some trees somewhere, your airplane's suddenly carbon neutral. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But that there's higher value. There's better returns from land now for those kind of uses than growing food on it. Yeah. So that takes more and more land out of production. The food becomes more scarce. So if you can afford that long-term view, owning land is a really smart move right now. Yeah. And that's why, but farmers can't afford that long-term hold. They need to put food on the table tomorrow. And when, my father dies or a generation has passed, you've got you're only running a cash flow. Profit's one thing, but cash flow, you only run out of it once, don't you?
So I know food's really important, right? So we can't be flippant and cavalier about it, but let's just address a couple of those things. Some people might say, like with other industries and other sectors, we've seen it. There's a lot of parallels with the industry I've come from, which is hospitality, and because there's so many perils, weather is one of them, but a range of other things, and licensing regime, and issues about legislation and restrictions and impositions, and what that's meant, and how people think you're when you're busy, you're all making lots of profit, you're doing a
Mhm.
big turnover, but the costs are enormous, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But a lot of venues have closed down in the last 5 years, and people might say, well, it's like people don't want it, it's the way it is. You could make a lot of money, Clive, from selling some of that lovely land and developing it. Maybe, people might say different things. They say everyone's got a cost of living crisis. Do you think that, and this is where some people have all sorts of views. Do you think it's just the nature of the concentration of capital that big companies like BlackRock are doing it? Or do you think there's a bit more of a political sort of plan, if you would, but like a discussion that's going on with major players? We just saw BlackRock meet with the Prime
Mhm.
Minister, for instance. We know that Bill Gates and others are having these conversations about land. Like you say, there's practical things about, well, I might have to just do this because there's a lot of planning money, there's a lot of money coming in solar, so I do a bit of, but how much do you think it's just the nature of all these things that are going on, or how much do you think people are actually pushing in a direction? I don't just mean the big companies, but perhaps politically as well. How do you see that?
Well, you know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I like to try and be logical about things, but at the same time, it does all seem to be falling into a way that you can't help wonder what's really going on. I mean, I think something that's important to get across that I always feel awkward, if I'm honest, but I'll try and be really open and honest about it. So I always feel a little awkward about talking about this in terms of like, and I've heard it quite a bit in this debate in the last few weeks. It's like, well, there's no getting away from the fact that somewhere on a piece of paper, I'm a really wealthy man. Yeah, I've got like, because I've got, thanks to those previous two generations that have worked hard, invested, and a bit of my own work, I'd like to think as well, because I'm no spring chicken myself. I've got two boys that I'd like to continue and carry on farming. Because of that, on a piece of paper somewhere, I'm worth millions, yeah? But I don't see it as money because I'm just a custodian, like my father was and my grandfather was. It until the day I sell it. So I've got an option. I could be incredibly selfish right now. I could say, right, I'm done with this. Everything's working and conspiring against me. I should encourage my kids to go and, get some qualifications to something else and don't be farmers, don't do that. Cash it in, sell it to the highest bidder. Probably not a farmer because I've just explained farming's not particularly investable right now. So, and where we are, we're quite urban fringe of our land. So a lot of it probably would end up getting developed ultimately, and solar and batteries and all those things that people generally don't want. So I could walk away and, I'm 51 now. There's probably enough to see me out happily ever after. Fine. But I'm no longer a farmer if I do that. There's no chance that my next generation can farm. So I've kind of broken that contract, that custodian kind of contract with the countryside. Yeah. It'd be an incredibly selfish thing for me to do. So that's why farmers don't think like that. And they're all in similar positions. Well, say all, most of them on a piece of paper have this wealth that, yeah, there's no getting away from it. Most people go, well, I'll never have that kind of opportunity, it's silver spoon, what are you moaning about, but they don't see that. They don't see pounds. They see acres. They see cows. They see yield. I've never come across a farmer that talks about how much money I've got invested in land or how much money they talk about. Oh, how many? When you meet a farmer, you don't know it. Oh, how many acres you farm? How many? What number of livestock do you have? What breed are they? They don't see it as pound. And if they did, and I tell you what, the genie it's hard to put back in the bottle after this discussion. I think quite a few of them have suddenly woken up to just how poor their return on investment is. There's a guy on the farming forum that I run. There's a guy on there. He put it quite succinctly. He said, "I'm running out of excuses to keep farming for my wife now." We've been living a lifestyle. She's suddenly realizing that actually, if we cashed it all in and put it in a building society, we could live a much, selfishly a much better life. I don't want to do that because I enjoy it. I've got, I want to pass it on to the next generation. As that. But he said, I'm running out of excuses, to be honest. It's getting hard to justify now.
Absolutely. Well, you make that point really
Mm.
clearly, and just to clarify as well, because not, a lot of people don't think about all this stuff. Some people don't think about it till after they've died. If they do have anything, like now we've seen property in London and Manchester is more expensive, or in the southeast, southwest. But if you hit a certain amount, people will have to sell their property let's say they inherit a house, if they're lucky enough to do
Mhm.
that, in order to pay off the inheritance tax. So what you're actually saying is, even if all of this means that even if you carry on doing what you're doing and you didn't check, that if you try to pass it on, then your family would come into this problem, right? Which is, how do we pay this inheritance tax at the
Yeah.
time that someone deceases? Which means you have to, the logic is people have to sell off assets and sell off everything in order just to pay the inheritance tax, right? If you just can just clarify that and just make it clear to everyone.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, frankly, I personally feel that all inheritance tax is fundamentally wrong. They're taxing money that we've already paid tax on. So it's a double tax, whether that's your personal house, your farm, your business, whatever. It just doesn't seem right to me to tax money that's already been taxed. It's kind of like, yeah, taking a double dip, isn't it? Now, I guess, but if there is a difference between someone's house being taxed and a business, it's the business, a successful business and what they should be trying to encourage, if they want growth in an economy, they need businesses to do well. Because if we are making money, we pay tax. This idea. I think there's also that's debates come at farmers. Well, why don't farmers pay their tax like everybody else? We do. We pay PAYE, we pay income tax, we pay VAT, we pay national insurance. We pay corporation tax if the farm's set up as a limited company or whatever. It's no different to any other. There's no other differences. So surely a wise treasury, a wise chancellor wants to create a situation where we make more money, so therefore we pay more tax, we employ more people, so we pay more national insurance. Surely that's the right thing to do. But they're effectively doing the opposite. So you're not going to get growth, you're not going to get that investment. And you take away by burdening the business with either, this tax bill to pay over time or having to shrink to kind of to pay it, in one go because they can't afford to pay it out of profits. You shrink the business, then you shrink the economy. And that again, you mentioned it a few times. The BPR thing isn't unique to farming, so they're going to do that to all of these businesses, not just farmers.
Yeah, and that's really
Yeah,
important. And it's particularly like we have lots of people that joined us that are from hospitality, retail, and a range of small, medium-sized businesses. And this is coming down the pipeline. I'm also hearing people are like putting off launching their companies because of concerns with it. We know that a lot of younger people and a lot of entrepreneurs already have left for places like Dubai, but also Portugal and elsewhere. And this whole strategy or non-strategy, I don't know what the special advisors are doing in those briefing meetings
mm,
with the government at the moment, but you can see that between the Treasury and DEFRA, all the numbers aren't adding up. It's almost like there's this kind of crazy situation where it's a blag. It's a bit, it seems to look like to everyone, right? We're being told 500 farms will be affected, but most of the information looks like it's more like 70,000. There's about
yeah,
220, 230,000 farms, right, in Britain. I think that around that number.
yeah.
What's that all about? How do
They,
you?
they, they've got their numbers totally wrong. Honestly, unless you're a Labour MP who's reading a script that you're being given, I don't think anybody is trying to say that 500 number's right. It's becoming indefensible, almost laughable to hear that users. You've got, not just the NFU, but there's independent valuation authorities, the CLA. Loads of people have kind of blown or they've not. I won't get into the detail because it gets really nitty gritty accountancy stuff. But there's lots of reasons why they base the numbers around a very basic set of data about really considering the fact that APR and BPR claims go together, and there's lots of reasons why they're not right. So people aren't exaggerating about that. They're wrong, miles wrong. And even 500. Let's just assume for a minute it was 500. Losing 500 farms a year. That's pretty sick. That. Why is that acceptable anyway? Even though the number
Yeah,
is far more, as we've just said, but that wouldn't be acceptable because 500 a year over a generation, 25 years. You do the maths on that, there's not many farms left then, right? So even that number's not acceptable. So I don't even know why even the number they're peddling out wrong has been acceptable, isn't acceptable. And you kind of think, I think, going back to what you said about the meetings between, BlackRock and whatever and our government, I can't help but think that maybe governments do feel it's easier if land is just owned by big corporates and stuff, because then maybe they've only got to deal with when they want to change things, they've only got to really deal with one person, one set of people or fewer people. The way it is at the moment, if they want to change the way we farm for whatever reason, trying to get a load of independent businesses to all go in a direction they want them to go, that's tough, complicated, hard to do, slow to get change. So maybe they're just trying to make life easier for themselves. Maybe that's the only agenda. Maybe there's not money or whatever behind it. Maybe probably it's the money behind everything, it seems. But maybe it's just about they're trying to simplify, and in the meantime they've forgotten about, that human cost, or how people actually want society to be, or who they actually want as custodians of the countryside. That I don't know. I don't know in my own head whether it's a purposeful, deep, dark conspiracy, or just almost like, let's just try and make life easier because we think we're doing the right thing. I don't know.
Well, the important thing is that, and this is one of the things we've often said at Together, people have got all different views at Together. We have we kind of like an umbrella organization. We have lots of different people, even on our steering group and our board. We often have different views. People have come from different political backgrounds. But the one thing we agree on is that the way you get change is that regardless of why you think anything's happening, is when we get the public to actually hold a line on something and argue and go to MPs and the cabinet and different institutions. And we've got people locally, regionally and nationally, and we've done a lot of that campaigning. You have done precisely that, right? You and some other guys, and it'd be good if you could explain what you did. But basically on the 19th, that really fantastic rally that we all went to in London, where you had like a stage and you had tens of thousands of farmers come down, and it really demonstrated a number of things. I think it really showed that, like, the kind of practical can-do thing, the kind of sensible, calm, resilient outlook of farmers, but it showed that a determination. And I think that the government would be foolhardy to ignore that. But what was your thinking? Tell us a bit about what you did with that, and how you see the landscape for moving forwards, if you would.
Yeah, so that all happened very quickly. I mean, what the story behind the rally in London was, as well as farm, I run a website called the Farming Forum, which is a bit like a Facebook for farmers, or a Reddit type thing. There's a whole story behind that for another day, probably, but it's basically it's the only one of its kind in the UK. So it's hugely popular. Farmers, there's kind of 40,000 of them on their everyday UK and Ireland, all discussing all sorts of things farming, like knowledge exchange type thing. And as a result of that, it was very clear as soon as the budget announcement was made, which came out of the blue. Not only came out of the blue, it contradicted. Keir Starmer had spoken at a farming event earlier in the year and categorically said he wouldn't make these changes, and farmers were safe under Labour and whatever. This was all before the election and the budget. So it came out of the blue, came as a complete shock. And the forum that's normally full of people talking about, what tractor brand's good, or where to get a good price for seed, or what's wrong with my sheep, all that kind of general chitter chatter, suddenly became dominated by threads about, what the hell am I going to do? Desperate people that desperately suddenly realizing the consequences of this, that this was going to be effectively the final nail, like this would ruin their family farm. They wouldn't be able to continue when that generation left. And you've got a situation in farming where the average ages are quite old. I think 38% of farmers are over the age of 68. So I think we're all quite in touch with this, the whole succession planning is something that actually farming's really quite on with. So I started getting a lot of messages personally, as well as the many threads that were started about this. I got a lot of messages personally from people saying, someone needs to take some leadership here. What are we going to do? What are the National Farming Union? What are they doing, or whatever? So now that they reacted, the National Farming Forum said, well, we're going to do this event in London on the 19th, and it's going to be. It wasn't really what farmers wanted to hear, I think is probably the best way to put it. It was like, right, we've got Church Hall. It's a mass lobby event, yeah, because they seemed very scared about doing anything a bit more direct action. Mass lobby event, Church Hall at Westminster, 600 farmers. We're going to invite a load of MPs, and you can all come talk to them, write to them, get them to get this changed. It filled out really quickly. It was for NFU members only. People said, well, I'm coming to London anyway. So they very quickly extended that. And I think they went, I do 3 sessions, 1,800 farmers. Then they announced this whole, and by the way, we really advise no one else to come to London, yeah, because there's nowhere for you to go. We can only accommodate these sessions. Now that just really seemed to wind people up on the forum. They really were angry. They wanted to express, something, just do anything to kind of show, this affected so many more people than the 500 being talked about in all the PR. So, they were going to London anyway. So me and a couple of others, Ollie Harrison, Martin, Andrew Ward, we all kind of, I started a little WhatsApp group. They'd all got kind of big social media followings on YouTube mainly, those guys. And obviously I'd got the ear of all these farmers on the forum. And I sent them a message kind of late one night, when going to bed, kind of wondering how I was going to sleep. There was a bit of pressure on me. So what we need to do something, guys. This is an industry desperate for someone to just do something about this. So we talked about it the next day and said, well, let's just kind of, speak to the Met Police and try and do something. We don't want to disrupt because we felt there was public support. And I think that's one of the things they said. There does seem to have been fantastic support for what we've been doing with it from the public. They understand. We didn't want to get like the French farmers straight away, let's start inconvenience people, because I think you very quickly start losing people if you start making them late for work, or their daily life gets difficult because of any demographic. No matter how good your cause for it is, you need to be quite careful about that thing these days. So
Yeah.
we said, look, okay, everyone who's coming to London, come to London still. We'll do a bit of rally, get a few speakers. We very quickly had, managed to get contact with quite a lot of big name politicians and celebrities. People like Clarkson offered support very early. So it became a bit of a monster, really. And all within like about, a week to 10 days, we managed to organize this thing, thinking we were going to get 10, maybe, hopefully 10. I think we hoped for 10,000 people turning up was our initial target. Could we really do that? I think we ended up somewhere between 45, 55,000, worked on what the Met said afterwards. It worked really well, ran as a really good event. And we achieved what we wanted to. We didn't disrupt, we didn't cause trouble. But what we made the point of is look, if we can organize this in a week, be careful, government, who you're taking on here. Because if we can get, let's say 45, 50,000 people who don't normally come to London very often, to take a day out, come down there and do that. Yeah, and that's a fraction of them. If that can be done in a week or so, if things go further, if you don't start to listen, if you don't accept, it's clearly not 500 people affected, is it? Because otherwise only 500 people would have turned up, right? So clearly that message has got across. But secondly, it's a little bit of a show of strength is all we wanted to do initially, because just start thinking about where this could go. You've got, people that are clearly desperate, clearly prepared to do things to change this situation. They're logistically all over the country. They own a lot of heavy equipment. You don't want to go down a route where they start, holding the economy to ransom or whatever. So, please, listen to that. So that's what that was all about. It went pretty well. I mean, it was so peaceful. The Met Police said in our debrief afterwards that we'd left Westminster tidier than when we got there. So
it was remarkable. It was a
Yeah.
remarkable event. It was really well organized, executed. I spent a lot of time over 35 years putting events on, and it was fantastic. The people, the spirit was great, really well organized. And I think it certainly has left a message. Now, last night we had Matt Cullen, who's organized tractor rallies in Dover and elsewhere. We've obviously seen things in Holyhead, in Wales, in Truro, up and down the country. And also Justin Rogers, the effing farmer, who's kind of done a lot of work he was telling us about in the counties, and having ambassadors and being able to activate people. And it looks like a lot of people are going to be, I mean, you'll know more about this, right? But a lot of people, I'm sure they're talking about on your Farmers Forum, which, by the way, sounds like a brilliant initiative. But around the country, and this is not just even coming to London, but Matt was talking, I mean, if the numbers could be between 300 and 500 tractors in Whitehall, that's a huge spectacle. We'll all be there on Wednesday. And we've all written to our MPs, and we're sort of saying that we support our farmers and this is an issue. But it's big stuff, right? It's not going away. I mean,
No.
it's not going to, if it falls on deaf ears right now, this is continuing, right, Clive? Is that?
Yeah, it's going to escalate. There's no doubt about it. I mean, they can't. This isn't a problem that's going to go away. Farmers they don't give up. They're used to working in horrendous weather, all hours. Their tenacity is huge. They're not going to give up on this, and they're being further and further pushed. It's not just this issue. This is, as I've said before, the straw that broke the camel's back a little bit. There's so many other issues that are behind that pathetic, almost embarrassing 0.5% return on investment that need addressing. This is the final straw for a lot. They're at a point where they're thinking, I've got nothing to lose now. This is the end of the line for my family farm, ultimately, when granddad passes away, or I do, and my children can't continue. So the government have put them in that position. And as you're saying, Wednesday's event that Matt's organising, that's a kind of escalation, isn't it? Bringing tractors to London, there's no getting away from it. That's going to cause some chaos. You put that many tractors in central London, that's going to be chaotic. I know from the forum, there's a farm action hub part to that. a lot of people are planning, because not everyone can get to London. I mean, I can't get down with a tractor. I'd have to set off now. It's a long way. So, but what's going on around the country is you've got other people organising similar kind of events in various towns around the country at the same time. At the moment, I think they're still intending to be non-disruptive, not causing problems. But things, if they don't start to listen, if they don't start acknowledging they've got these numbers wrong and look at them again, it's just going to get more and more, isn't it? How long before those same tractors are kind of blocking, supermarket distribution centers? We're in a world now where the supply system, just in time kind of supply chains, they're really fragile, and it doesn't take a lot these days to kind of like address, to kind of block some of those issues. And I don't necessarily, I've not been, I think you've got to try and do things the right way first. You've got to come in peace. You've got to try and negotiate. You've got to kind of, try and explain reasonably why things aren't right, aren't affordable, a tax is impossible or whatever, or why it's different. Again, farmers aren't special, but their business is different. That's that key message there. I hate this idea that people think farmers are special. Everyone's special. A farmer's no more special than a nurse or a doctor or a fireman or a policeman or any other member of society. We're all the same. We all contribute whatever is our role. But it's that difference in our businesses, really, that embarrassing return on investment. If we can't get that across, we're just going to have to keep pushing the point and driving the point harder and harder and harder. And then it will get messy. And farmers are up for that, it seems. The mood on the forum is very much in that direction. They've seen what's happened in Europe. It wasn't a lot about it wasn't massive in our media. Mainstream media, I don't know. Well, I probably do know why. They weren't reporting it very well. But I've got farming friends in Germany and in Spain and in France and in the Netherlands. And when all that was going on, like last year, they were WhatsApping me, saying it's chaos out here. Absolutely, there are motorways closed where, trailer loads of tires have been tipped up and set fire to. And they were causing absolute pandemonium in those countries, and they got listened to, because the government ended up having to listen to them because it was starting to cause big issues for the wider economy and how a country works. Now, UK farmers, played by the cream, I think we're a lot straighter than the French, so to speak, in that situation, playing more by the Queensberry rules. But people with nothing to lose become dangerous people, and the more you keep pushing them, the more militant they will become, and the more that action will become, the route that they will want to take. I can't stop anybody. You can't stop anybody doing these things, and they're all going to. There's no clear leadership where someone's going, right, everyone do what I say or don't do what I say. The NFU haven't really taken that place and done that. So everyone's out there setting up their own little things and their own ideas and their own solutions, and they've seen it work because it worked in Europe. And that's given them that kind of like, well, if it works for them, maybe that's how we do get this done,
Well, also in the Netherlands, you saw the creation of a new political party out of it, the BBB.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just astonishing the impact that it's had. And there are a lot of issues, and I'd love to get you back again, Clive. This is not going to be enough time to go through all the issues. And, we'll post about the Farmers Forum as well, because it's really important what you've done. Jeremy Clarkson, you had him speaking. Obviously is another person, right? I think interestingly, because I think the public really likes straight talking, and whatever anyone thinks about what's happened in the States, it's demonstrated that a lot of Americans, you can pile on assaults, and a few people that are in, let's call them metropolitan type people who they can be contemptuous of the public. They thought, they're just those wealthy farmers, and they mugged us off as well. They thought all the people in the city, they won't like them, but they've got a rude shock, because I think people are like connecting some of these dots and going, they're just doing this to everyone. They're saying they're not going to do it, and then they're attacking the pensioners. Now it's the farmers, it's the students, and then they try and call people names. They are like this, or a conspiracist, or a denier, or far right, when they're talking about everyday issues, right? We've seen it with drivers and around questions. If you've got questions about net zero as a policy, let alone anything else, they're ongoing, right? There's these accusations. But Jeremy Clarkson came and spoke. He's obviously in everyone's front room. People really like him. How do you see this next? So you're going to be there on Wednesday, right? So we're going to get a chance to have a chat with you again there. Great. So it's actually tomorrow. We'll see you at London. And we'd love to do some more with you, Clive. I think this is really, look, there's a couple of things. On the one hand, it's very worrying. I think the conversation in America, which has been really interesting, this new kind of cabinet that's been formed, one of the key things is food. And it's
Mm.
like Robert Kennedy Jr. and Jay Bhattacharya talking about making America healthy again, right? And like the whole conversation, we haven't really touched on some of the supermarkets, processed foods, the food industry. But what a lot of you guys are doing and having local farmers and local food, but price points and how it can be made, are there incentives that could be done? This could be a big discussion in Britain, right? Which I think a lot of the public would like. The question for retail, other types of organizations are getting food to people. I think a lot of people I think one of the stats is that farmers aren't making any more money, but the supermarket prices keep going up, right? So the cost of living is impacting everyone. All these things are really essential I think, for many people in Britain. So
It's a
would you?
long overdue conversation. It's long overdue. Someone a book I read. He said, "What's it? Eat your food as medicine, or medicine will be your food." And it's true. It has getting our food system's broken. It seems our politics seems to be very broken and missing. I think you mentioned Clarkson. I think what he's brought to this debate is something that's very, very common amongst farmers that I know, which is very practical and very common sense, say it like it is type approach. And that's missing in our food system right now, and in the way that in the way that politics are. I think in general it's brought there's bigger issues to light a little bit. And I think Clarkson, he was very concerned about, because you could argue, and he would agree with the argument, I'm sure, that he's one of the people that's probably this tax was aimed to take out. These people that have kind of like made money elsewhere, bought farmland and whatever. But he put it quite eloquently at the rally. He said what they've done with the way they've done it, it's like they needed to take people like him out with a sniper rifle, potentially, yeah, but they've used a blunderbuss and like basically taken every family farm out when trying to do it. And that's the bit that's not right, that they need to get right. But that said, watching what Clarkson's farm, I think, has done for us as farmers is you can see from it genuinely the fact he works so hard doing it, the hours, the time, the risk. And then at the end of the year, he kind of sees such a small return for it. Even though the guy, it doesn't matter to him like it would to most farmers. It's not keeping the wool from his door, is it? But you can tell it matters to him, genuinely. He's either a hell of an actor, or it genuinely bothers him that you can work that hard for so little. And that needs to change. Yeah.
Series I was watching was £155 at the end of the year when you net everything down and you get it out. And I mean,
at least it was positive. Some years that can be a negative.
Yeah. So, I mean, Clive, you're one of the straight talking type people that I think British politics needs to see. You may not want to hear that, but I mean, I think that, having some farmers involved in politics and doing some things, we've got a situation now where all the politicians did the same PPE course at Oxbridge. Very few of them seem to have had any other experience working in the past. Both Labour and Conservative, they had people from all walks of life. We could do with some farmers, some can-do approach in our economics and politics. But listen, we'll talk to you tomorrow at the rally, but we'd love you to come back and talk some more to us. I think it's a very important moment. We're at a kind of turning point, and we certainly are going to keep supporting you and all the farmers. So well done, and thank you for all your efforts, and thanks for joining us here today.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, it's great, and thanks for keeping a bit of awareness up there. Because we're a small demographic. We need the public behind us to understand, how important this is, because it affects ultimately a lot more than just farming.
Great. And just remember, everyone, just keep making sure you send an email, phone your MP, get that letter in, and we're going to do some calls to action to get to the surgery so that they know they're just not going to ignore one email. It's going to be a series of our calls to action. We're going to do the same with government and make sure that our voices are continually heard together. We're stronger, we're better together, and let's make sure we support our farmers together.